We were supposed to be in this together. I had always believed that. Through the ups and downs, we had built a life together. Or so I thought. When she told me she needed a break, not a divorce, just a separation for a while, it felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. The idea of being apart, of losing what we had worked so hard for, hit me harder than I ever anticipated. But she insisted. She needed space. At first I was understanding, giving her the benefit of the doubt, convinced that some time apart might be good for us. We were both growing and evolving, and maybe a little distance could help us recalibrate, come back stronger. She promised it would only be temporary. But then, days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The more she asked for space, the more distant she became. At first I didn't think much of it. I told myself that people grow apart and relationships sometimes need room to breathe. But as time went on, her behavior became more and more suspicious. She was always vague about where she was going, what she was doing. I noticed her coming home later and later, and when I asked her about it, she'd always respond with a shrug, or a nonchalant, just work. Her phone became a fortress too. She was more protective of it than ever. She'd keep it face down on the table, and if I ever happened to glance at it, she'd quickly pick it up and leave the room. Her once open demeanor had shifted to one of secrecy, and something inside me told me that something wasn't right. I didn't want to believe it at first. After all, we'd been together for years. She had always been my best friend, my partner. So, when she told me she needed time alone to focus on herself, I took it at face value. I gave her the space she asked for, but something nagged at me every time she left the house. The little things that had once seemed insignificant began to stand out. The sudden attention she started giving her appearance, the way she would carefully pick out her outfits, style her hair with a precision I hadn't seen in years. It was subtle at first, almost as if she was trying to make a statement, but then it became more pronounced. She started dressing up when she went out, spending extra time getting ready, always looking perfect. I wasn't used to seeing her like that. She was always beautiful, but these little changes didn't seem normal. It wasn't until I saw the gleam in her eyes when she received a text one evening that I began to connect the dots. I had always trusted her completely. But now, that trust was slowly eroding with every passing day. I started to question everything. Her late nights, her newfound obsession with her appearance, and the way she seemed to be pulling away from me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Something bigger was going on behind the scenes, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to uncover it. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination running wild, that I was being paranoid. But deep down, I knew something wasn't adding up. Her behavior was starting to resemble that of someone with something to hide. And the more I thought about it, the more everything seemed to fall into place. I had always trusted her with everything, my heart, my finances, my future. But now I was beginning to wonder if my trust had been misplaced. I didn't confront her, not yet. I knew if I brought it up too soon, I would be dismissed as just being overly possessive or paranoid. So I waited. I decided to watch and wait for her to slip up. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me doubt her, but I would keep my eyes open. I started paying attention to the small things, the way she acted when she thought I wasn't paying attention, the little moments where I caught glimpses of her emotions that she was trying to hide. But it wasn't until one day that I received a call from a mutual friend that things really started to fall apart. The call came at the most unexpected moment. I was sitting on the couch trying to focus on a book that I could barely concentrate on when my phone rang. It was a friend of mine, one I hadn't spoken to in a while, but I knew him well enough. He sounded a bit off when I answered. There was something in his voice, a hesitation, like he was unsure about sharing whatever news he had with me. "Hey, man, I hope this isn't a bad time," he started, his tone light but clearly trying to sound casual. "I just wanted to tell you something that might be important." I immediately felt a twinge of discomfort. The last time I'd heard from him, everything was fine, and now he was calling me with this cryptic tone. I braced myself for what was coming. Next, he hesitated again, then spoke more clearly. "I ran into her name today. Just by accident. I didn't think anything of it at first, but then, well, something about it struck me as odd. She was out with someone, man, and I swear I've never seen this guy before." My stomach dropped. My mind raced to catch up with the implications of what he was saying. I managed to get out a quick response. "What do you mean, out with someone?" He was quick to clarify, though the words cut through me like a cold breeze. They were having lunch, looked pretty cozy, actually. I mean, it was like the way they were sitting close, talking, laughing. It just didn't sit right with me. I don't know, man. I thought you should know. That was all it took to set off a series of alarms in my mind. I felt the air in the room grow heavier. My friend didn't have any reason to lie. And even if he was wrong about their relationship, the fact that it had come to this was enough to break whatever illusion of trust I had left. Did she seem, I don't know, like more than just friendly? I asked, my voice sounding tight, more strained than I'd intended. He paused, likely assessing his words, then answered with more certainty. Yeah, it seemed that way. She was laughing a lot more than she normally does when we hang out. She was all over him. You know, the kind of things you do when you're into someone. Touching his arm, getting close. Just too comfortable for it to be just friends. Look, I'm not trying to start anything, but I thought you should know. I didn't know how to respond. The revelation was sudden, like a punch to the gut. She'd been telling me that everything was fine, that she just needed space. And now here I was, hearing from someone else that she was out with another guy looking like they were anything but platonic. I could feel my anger building up inside of me, but I kept it in check. There was still too much I didn't know, and I had no proof. Maybe it was nothing, maybe I was overreacting, but my gut told me otherwise. Thanks for telling me, I said, trying to keep my tone neutral, but inside I was boiling. I need to figure out what's going on. As soon as I hung up the phone, I felt like I was standing on the edge of something. A part of me wanted to confront her right then and there, but another part of me knew that would only cause a scene, without any real evidence. I needed to be smarter than that. I needed to gather more information to be sure of what I was dealing with before I made any moves. The next few days were a blur. I watched her more closely than I ever had, noting how she was acting more distant, more aloof than ever. She spent hours on the phone, but when I asked about it, she would dismiss it as just work. But something about her response didn't sit right with me. It wasn't just her sudden secrecy or the way she kept her phone glued to her hand, always checking it, always texting. No, it was the way she acted like everything was normal when deep down I knew things weren't. One evening, I had an idea. I would follow her. Not in a creepy, obsessive way, but enough to get a sense of what she was really doing when she left the house. It was a risk, but I was beyond the point of trusting her at face value. I had to know the truth, even if it meant seeing something I wasn't ready for. I waited for her to leave that evening just like any other day. She told me she was going out with friends, but something felt different about her energy that night. I couldn't explain it, but I knew I had to act. I grabbed my jacket, my keys, and casually walked out the door after her. I kept my distance, not wanting to make it obvious, but I stayed close enough to keep track of where she was going. She walked with purpose, almost too quickly, like she was in a hurry to get somewhere, to meet someone. And then, I saw him. A man I had never seen before. He was standing outside the coffee shop, casually leaning against the wall, waiting. When she saw him, her face lit up, and I couldn't help but feel the sting of betrayal as they embraced. There was no mistaking it. She was meeting him. There was no just friends about it. I stood frozen for a moment, watching them interact. The way she laughed, the way he touched her arm, the familiarity between them. It was all there, plain as day. They were more than friends. And I knew, without a doubt, that the separation she had asked for wasn't about space at all. It was her way of testing the waters with someone else, trying to find something better than what we had built together. I could feel my anger bubbling up again, but this time, it wasn't just anger. It was clarity. I had been right to doubt her, to wonder if there was something more going on, and now I knew I had to take action. The truth was right in front of me, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. The following days were a mix of raw emotion and calculated silence. My mind was in overdrive, replaying every detail of what I had seen. The image of her laughing, her hands casually touching his arm, replayed on an endless loop. It felt like the floor beneath me had disappeared, and I was left suspended in the air, unsure of how to move forward. That night, after seeing them together, I went home, but I couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. The trust I thought I had in her had evaporated, leaving a void I didn't know how to fill. Every little thing she did seemed suspect now. Every word she said felt hollow. I found myself questioning her intentions, her loyalty. What was real? What had I been blind to all this time? I knew I had to confront her, but I also knew that doing so would mean exposing everything. What would I say? How would I explain what I had seen without sounding paranoid or obsessive? I couldn't just accuse her without proof. I needed more. I needed to understand what was going on behind the facade she'd carefully built. So, I decided to play it smart. I started asking subtle questions, fishing for information. I wanted her to slip up, to let something slip that would confirm my suspicions. But each time she was too careful, too calculated. She told me about her friends, the ones she supposedly spent time with, but there was always a level of detachment in her voice. She never gave away anything personal, never let me into her world. I wasn't naive. I knew the game. She was trying to keep me at arm's length while she explored something new. The separation, the space she had asked for, wasn't about self-discovery or personal growth. It was about freedom. Freedom to do what she wanted without me interfering. I realized that I was simply a safety net for her, a fallback if things didn't work out with him. I couldn't just let it go. If she wanted freedom, then I had to make sure she understood what that really meant. But I also had to make sure I wasn't being reckless. I had to gather more evidence, something irrefutable, before I could make my next move. One afternoon while she was out, I went through her things. Not in a fit of rage, but with a methodical focus. I knew there had to be something I could find. Something that would give me the concrete proof I needed. It didn't take long. I found a receipt for a dinner reservation at a restaurant I knew she frequented with him. The date on it was the day after our last argument. When she told me she needed space, the pieces were falling into place. I wasn't imagining things. This wasn't just a misunderstanding or a miscommunication. She was seeing someone else, and everything I had suspected about her actions, the phone calls, the sudden secrecy, the late nights, had led to this moment. But still, there was something deeper eating away at me. I wasn't just hurt by her actions, I was angry. Angry at how easily she'd discarded everything we had, at how quickly she'd replaced me with someone new. And more than anything, I was angry at myself for not seeing it sooner. How had I missed the signs? How had I allowed myself to be blind to the truth for so long? I wasn't going to let her get away with this. I had to take control of the situation, to regain some of the power I had lost. But I knew it wouldn't be easy. She had her reasons for acting the way she did, and she wasn't going to let me stand in the way of whatever it was she thought she wanted. But I wasn't just going to sit back and let her walk all over me. So I began to plot. I wasn't going to confront her just yet. No, I needed to set a trap, one that would expose her for who she really was. I needed to make sure that when the time came, she would have no excuses, no explanations. I would have everything I needed to prove that she had betrayed me, and in the end I would come out on top. The first step in my plan was simple. I needed to find out where she would be next. She was always so secretive about her plans, but I knew her routine. I knew where she liked to go, the places she felt comfortable. It was time to use that knowledge to my advantage. The plan was set. I was going to follow her just as I had done before, but this time I had a purpose. I wasn't just trying to catch a glimpse of her with him. I was going to get close, get inside her world, and understand everything she was doing. I needed to know the full extent of her betrayal. No more second-guessing, no more wondering. I was going to have answers, even if it meant crossing some lines myself. The day came. I watched her leave the house as usual, but this time I wasn't going to let her out of my sight. I waited a few minutes before following her. It wasn't the first time I had trailed her, but it felt different now. The anxiety was sharp, but the anger was sharper. She had no idea I was onto her, and I was going to use that to my advantage. She drove to a part of town I didn't recognize, a place where the roads were winding and narrow, hidden by the trees and the bustle of the city. She parked in front of a small, nondescript building. Nothing out of the ordinary at first glance, but I knew it wasn't just any building. There was something off about it. The way she parked, as if trying to avoid being noticed. The way she looked around before entering. I waited for a few moments, watching her disappear inside before I made my move. I couldn't risk losing her. Not now. I parked a little further down the road and walked back toward the entrance, trying to blend into the background. I wasn't sure if I was being paranoid, but my gut told me this wasn't just any place. It was a secret, a hideout, and she was keeping it hidden from me. I circled the block a few times, trying to gather as much information as I could without getting too close. I didn't want her to see me. I didn't want her to know I was onto her. The last thing I wanted was to give her an out, a chance to explain herself. After what felt like an eternity, she came back out, but she wasn't alone. He was with her. The same man from before, the one she was meeting, the one she had been lying to me about. He was holding her hand, and she was smiling, her face alight with excitement. Seeing them together, so carefree and happy, hit me like a punch to the gut. But I couldn't let myself break down, not now. I had a plan, and I wasn't going to let my emotions get in the way. I followed them as they walked to the car, staying far enough behind to avoid suspicion. They drove off in the direction of a fancy restaurant, a place I had never been, but I knew it well enough to understand it was a place for special occasions, not casual meetups. I kept my distance, but I couldn't help the sick feeling rising in my chest. She had been lying to me, leading me to believe that our marriage was just in a rough patch, that she was just trying to figure things out. But here she was, with him, living a completely different life behind my back. I couldn't let this go on any longer. The plan needed to be set in motion now. I was done being passive. I was done playing the part of the clueless husband. I wasn't going to sit by and watch her destroy everything I'd worked for. I went home that night, but sleep didn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her with him, laughing and talking, as if everything was normal. I couldn't focus, couldn't think clearly. My mind kept drifting back to what I had seen, what I had learned. I knew I couldn't confront her yet. She would deny everything. She would twist the story to make it look like I was overreacting. But I couldn't let her get away with it. Not this time. The next morning I woke up with a clear sense of purpose. I was going to do this, and I was going to do it my way. I wasn't going to give her a chance to control the narrative. I was going to make sure that she knew exactly what she had lost. I started making calls. I needed a plan that would catch her off guard, something that would make her realize the consequences of her actions. I had to get ahead of her, make her realize that her lies wouldn't go unpunished. It was time to set the trap. I had all the information I needed. I knew where they would be, and I knew exactly what I needed to do to expose her. There was no turning back now. This was the only way to regain control, to make sure she understood that I was not a fool. The decision was made, and I knew exactly what I had to do. It was time to take the power back. I had watched her lie, manipulate, and twist our relationship into something unrecognizable. But now the tables were about to turn. I wasn't going to sit quietly while she destroyed everything we had worked for. No more games, no more pretending. I was going to expose her, and this time, she wasn't going to have a chance to wiggle out of it. I spent the day preparing, making sure every detail was perfect. There was no room for error now. I knew what I had to do, but I also knew that I had to do it in a way that would hit her the hardest. I couldn't give her an easy escape. I had to make sure that she realized the full weight of her actions, and that meant catching her off guard, hitting her where it hurt the most. I made a few phone calls, set things in motion, and arranged for everything to fall into place. By the time evening came, I had everything I needed. A reservation at that fancy restaurant she had been to with him. A carefully planned set of circumstances that would leave her blindsided. But I wasn't going to be the one to confront her, just yet. Not yet. That was for later. Right now, it was time to let her walk straight into my trap. The next part of the plan was crucial. I didn't want her to suspect anything until it was too late. I had to remain calm, composed, as though nothing was wrong. I didn't want her to sense the betrayal that was coming. So, I acted normal, as if everything was just fine. I made sure to act as if I didn't know anything. No sneaky glances, no hint of suspicion in my voice. I didn't want to give her a chance to get defensive or start looking for an out. I had to make her believe that I had no idea what she was up to, that I was just a clueless husband, content in my ignorance. I played my role perfectly. I pretended like I didn't care about her business trips and late nights out. I smiled through the small talk, pretended to be interested in the conversation she had about her work. But in the back of my mind, I knew exactly what was going on. I had everything I needed to confront her, and it was just a matter of time before the truth came crashing down. The night of the dinner arrived. I watched her get dressed, carefully selecting her outfit, spending more time than usual in front of the mirror. She was doing it for him. I knew it, and that knowledge simmered beneath the surface of my calm exterior, but I didn't let it show. I didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing my anger. Instead, I gave her the space to think everything was just as normal. She had no idea what was about to happen. As she got ready to leave, I casually asked her where she was going. She told me she was meeting some friends, and I nodded as if I had no reason to doubt her. I knew she was lying, but I didn't let on. I smiled, kissed her goodbye, and watched her walk out the door. The moment she left, I began to set things in motion. I had already arranged for a car to be waiting outside for her, a black limo that would take her and her date to the restaurant. I knew exactly where they would be sitting. and I made sure the staff was briefed. But I didn't stop there. I also arranged for a special surprise to be waiting for her on the table. The final piece of the puzzle was the note. I had written it with a steady hand, the words coming to me easily. I had to make it sting, had to make it hit her like a slap in the face. "Hope he's worth it," I wrote, signing my name at the bottom. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had thought she could keep this secret from me, but I was going to make sure she understood exactly what she had lost. The limo arrived at the restaurant, and I was ready to watch the whole thing unfold. But I wasn't going to be the one to approach her. Not yet. I wanted to give her a moment to settle in, to get comfortable in her lies before I dropped the bombshell. I waited for her to sit down at the table, her back turned, her face lit up, with excitement as she saw him walk in. She didn't know it yet, but this was the last dinner she would ever have with him. I could already imagine the look on her face when she read the note. The mix of confusion, betrayal, and regret. It was exactly what she deserved. The moment had arrived. I was sitting in the car just across the street from the restaurant, watching through the tinted windows as she walked in, a smile on her face as she greeted him. I could barely contain the satisfaction that was building inside me. For so long, I had been the fool. I had trusted her, believed her lies, convinced myself that everything was fine, but now I was going to make sure she paid for every ounce of betrayal. I watched as the staff ushered her and her date to the table, their interaction casual, almost flirtatious. I couldn't help but wonder how long they had been doing this behind my back. How many times had she whispered sweet nothings in his ear while pretending to care for me? The thought of it made my stomach churn with a mixture of anger and disbelief. How could she do this to me? How could she be so careless, so reckless, thinking she would never get caught? But it wasn't just the affair. It was the complete disregard for our relationship, for the trust we had built over the years. She had taken everything for granted, assuming I would always be there, always forgiving, always blind to her transgressions. Well, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. As I sat there, I couldn't help but replay the moments leading up to this. The countless times she had smiled at me, telling me everything was fine, that she loved me. How I had believed it, even when my gut was screaming at me that something was off. I had been naive, trusting her too much, and now it was time to face the consequences of my own ignorance. But as much as I hated myself for not catching on sooner, I knew I had done the right thing. I had finally taken control of the situation. I had stopped letting her run the show, stopped pretending everything was okay while she kept playing her game. I had prepared for this moment, and I wasn't going to let her slip away this time. From the corner of my eye, I saw the waiter arrive with a tray, the note resting delicately on top. He placed it on the table in front of her, and I watched as her eyes scanned it. It was almost as if the world had slowed down for a moment. She picked it up, her face crinkling in confusion as she read the words, "Hope he's worth it." The smile on her face faltered, her eyes widening with shock, as she glanced at the note, then back at her date. He looked at her, confused, before realizing the situation was far more complicated than he had anticipated. She set the note down gently, as though it were a bomb about to go off. I saw her lips move, her voice too quiet for me to hear, but I could tell from her expression that she was rattled. Her hands trembled slightly as she pushed the note away. And then the real moment arrived. She looked up, scanning the restaurant as though searching for someone who wasn't there. She didn't see me. She wouldn't, not yet. But she knew something was wrong. She had to. Her perfect world, her carefully constructed lies were starting to crumble. In that instant, I could see the cracks in her facade. I could see the guilt, the realization that everything she had built was about to be torn apart. She looked at him, as if hoping he would be the knight in shining armor who could save her. But he was just as much a part of the lie as she was. I wasn't going to let either of them walk away unscathed. I leaned back in the seat, watching her carefully, making sure to savor every moment of her discomfort. She had thought she could keep this a secret, that she could play me for a fool, forever. But now the truth was out and there was no going back. She finally looked up, scanning the restaurant again, and her eyes met mine through the window. The realization hit her like a freight train. She knew what was happening now. She knew what I had done. Her face went pale as she sat frozen in place, her breath catching in her throat. The man beside her remained clueless, still unsure of what had just happened. Her hands shook as she tried to compose herself, but I could see the panic rising in her. She had no idea what I had planned. I had carefully orchestrated every move, every detail, And now she was left to pick up the pieces of her shattered reality. The moment she stood up to leave, I knew it was time. I got out of the car and started walking towards the restaurant, my heart racing with anticipation. I couldn't wait to see the look on her face when she realized just how thoroughly she had been outplayed. She had thought she could walk away unscathed, but I had already set the wheels in motion for her downfall. As I approached the entrance, I saw her standing by the door, her eyes darting between me and the man. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Out. She was caught. She knew it, and so did I. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of an easy escape. I had already made my point. Now, it was time to finish what I had started. As I walked past her, I whispered under my breath, "You should have thought about this before." The silence that followed was deafening. I didn't need to say anything more. The damage had already been done, and she knew it. In that moment, I felt a strange sense of relief. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for so long seemed to lift. For the first time in a long time, I felt free.